Excellent. We hope that you guys have enjoyed your time here this morning and this afternoon with the sessions that you've attended. Before we begin this last section, we do want to remind you on your table there are some cards with a QR code that if you scan will bring you to a survey. It's a short survey that will give us a lot of good feedback to think about how this went for you, the information that you received today, and as we do this in the future, what we can do to make this better for you in providing professional development. So please take some time at some point to scan that QR code and answer that survey. That would be greatly appreciated. We're going to end today with a great little question and answer period. Many of you know our CAS Principal, High School Principal of the Year, but also the NASSP National Principal of the Year from Haddam-Killingworth, Donna Hayward. Donna wanted me to encourage you to come up with as many questions as you can. Personal questions are fine, and that's it. You know, we can head across to Ascot's Pub if we need to at the end. So, Donna, let's just start again. For those who may not know you that well, let's share with us some of your experiences as a teacher and administrator. Where did you begin your teaching career? And tell us what inspired you to become a high school principal.
Sure, thanks. So I actually started my career in education as a high school math teacher in Farmington. I was actually inspired once I made the decision to enter education, which I'll tell you about in a second. My inspiration was my own high school principal, who was a wonderful man by the name of Bill Pollock, who was my principal up until my senior year, and then he left our school in the middle of no place, Vermont, by the way, is where I grew up, to go start a school that included girls in Kuwait. I have no idea how he got that opportunity, but he did. He built the school, he opened the school, he was there for a number of years, and then unbeknownst to him, he flew back home to Vermont the day before the first Iraq War broke out. His school was bombed, it was burned to the ground, and so when the war was over, he returned to Kuwait, rebuilt his school, reopened his school, and that's how I learned what drive is. So yeah, so he's my inspiration. Side note, education was not my first plan. I went to Smith and graduated, took the LSATs, and was headed to law school, and got a letter from Smith before I left for school that said, hey, there's a shortage of math teachers across the country, and since you are a math minor, if you come back and do your Master's of Arts in Teaching at Smith and you agree to teach for 3 years, your master's degree is free. And so I did, and the rest is history. So. Side note for recruiting teachers later on, which I bet you're going to ask me about.
There you go. So there's one for one less lawyer. We'll take that. That's great. Donna, throughout your career, you've experienced many shifts in education, a lot of what we were talking about today as well. As a leader, tell us what advice you can give us about embracing change. And maybe what are some strategies that have really been successful for you at HK and leading your staff and the students through the many pedagogical changes that we've had and also all the shifts that we had in how to engage students over the years? And
that's a lot. So I would say there are two parts to my answer. The first is not glamorous, but it's real. So at HK and at all the schools I've led, we've had a very data-based decision-making process. So, and it's important how we do that because data by itself is not glamorous, right? But it's a thing, and you need to honor it. You need to honor the performance of your students and what to do about it when they're not doing as well as you would like them to do. So on my team, we meet in the summer, all of my department heads, all of my resource personnel, for a full day, a school-wide data day. We review every kind of data. So it's not just testing data, it's discipline data, it's attendance data, it's social emotional, SRBI data, it's every kind of data we can find, we analyze it. We decide what we need to celebrate. We decide what the needs are. This isn't novel, right? I'm not the only one that does this. And then our leadership team actually crafts the continuous improvement plan for the school, and they're the ones who present it to the faculty on the first day, the first faculty meeting. So the benefit there is, first of all, if change is needed, change is evident. Like, we've all seen it as a team because we've seen where our weak spots are. And the fact that they present it and it's their continuous improvement plan, not my continuous improvement plan, helps with teacher buy-in right away. And lastly, along the data strand, you can also tell if whatever change you've made in the next year's data, did it work? Or did you need to pick a different kind of solution? So I would say a data-based approach is key, just so you can tell what change is needed. That being said, I think teachers don't like change, right? Humans don't like change. Sometimes that's part of the hardest part of their job. So I think it's really important to respect the change process and respect our educators in the change. So data is one piece, and then their instinct and their gut and their knowledge of our kids and what's good for our kids is also very, very important. And I think we need to save space for subjective knowledge to ride alongside data, because that's really important. Two more things I would say just about change in general. Sometimes change comes from the outside, right? It's mandated. It's dictated either by state statute changing, or maybe it comes from central office and it's not necessarily aligned with something that we wanted to change that year. So when it comes from the outside and we have to do it, I think just honoring, like, okay, yep, this wasn't what we were going to choose this year, but let's do it together, allowing time for it, allowing space for it, supporting them through whatever has to be done, I think goes a long way. And then once in a while, I can only actually think of 2 occasions in the last decade or so, I've had to dictate a change before I had total buy-in, because I just knew something from past experience that just needed to happen. For example, I changed the special education model in my school when I got there based on past experience, and I just knew it would work. And so I didn't have total buy-in. And so if you give teachers voice and decision-making authority and influence most of the time, what I've found that is that once in a blue moon, they will give you grace and space if you just need to call it, right? They know. Once in a while, I just have to call it. And usually when I make a decision like that, and again, I can only think of a couple times in the last many years that I've had to make a major change when I didn't have total buy-in, I've used the approach of, okay, give me a year. Give me a year. Trust me on this, and if at the end of the year you don't like it or it doesn't work, okay, I'll listen to you and we'll pivot. And I never have to pivot. So.
That's great, and you know, we might see one of those coming up as we change that educator evaluation model. If you were listening, if you were in one of Jonathan's sessions, he might have shared with you that when they looked at the initial feedback of getting rid of the ratings, you know, there's a group of teachers that are just so customized to it and used to it that they don't want to change. They don't want to get away from that rating system. And so I said, you know, it's one of those things that I think is going to be put out there that, you know, this is what we want to do, but that might be one of those places that we all face with some teachers who they just want to do what they're used to, and they're used to that system. That'll be an interesting transition. Donna, the last few years for everybody here has been challenging. You know, it's fortunate that we can get out and do this, and you think it was only about a year ago that we actually took masks off. And I was thinking about that the other day, where we were coming into this weekend, and it was just this weekend because we were debating, do we still need to wear masks in our basketball championships? As we were coming here. So less than, you know, just about a year ago is when we took those masks off, and how challenging that's been. Tell us about some of the challenges facing administrators today. You, not only here in Connecticut, but you have had the pleasure now of being on the national stage and seeing, you know, what other people in states are feeling. And are we all in the same boat with these challenges, Donna? Are we all seeing the same thing? And, you know, so what do you see as some of our big challenges right now?
I think the biggest challenge right now is holding on to our teachers, recruiting teachers and administrators, recruiting educators into the fold, right? And then keeping them here once they're in. And yes, in answer to your question, I'll get to a couple specifics in a minute. I do see that and share those stories across my conversations with folks from literally all 50 states. So right now, we're in a crisis, right? Folks are leaving education, teachers are leaving education, administrators, the statistics are staggering. How many administrators are considering leaving or have left? And from my perspective, teachers and educators are leaving for 2 reasons, or not coming in for 2 reasons. Number one, pay, right? We're not paid enough to do what we are expected to do now with an ever growing set of responsibilities. And the second is, the decrease in respect for educators across the country. And I see all of you shaking your heads because we feel it. So let me talk about each one for a minute. And first of all, you said a lot in the beginning with, we're still coming off of COVID. So a couple things about that. Number one, we have whiplash. Remember just a year ago when we were the heroes? Remember that? And like, people were sick of having their kids home, and so send them back to school, and all hail teachers and administrators, and thank you folks for doing what we had to do for 3 months and thought we'd die. So thank you, teachers, and we were heroes through COVID. And then, I don't know like when it switched, but it seemed to switch overnight. All of a sudden, in the political climate we're in, we're suspect somehow. And so I feel like educators have a bit of post-COVID whiplash, which is a bummer because not only do we have whiplash, but we're also tired because we still haven't recovered, right, completely from all that we had to do during COVID. So I think there's two reasons that folks are leaving. One is the pay. We're just not paid enough for the incredibly long list of responsibilities that always just gets longer. Nothing ever gets taken off. But the good news is I am headed to the advocacy conference next week with you and with some folks from CAS, and we know that there is actually quite a bit of legislation coming on the radar screen relative to paying teachers better. There's a Loan Forgiveness Act under consideration, Teacher Pay Act. There are other bills to help teachers out and educators out with mental health and additional professional development. All of that is good. As a local administrator, I can help advocate for teachers during contract negotiations and say, listen, the higher the pay scale, the more talent we can recruit. I can fight for my own contract when it's admin contract time. But for the large-scale changes that need to be made, of course, we're going to need our legislators, and we're going to need some of that legislation to actually make it through. The other half we can do more about, or I feel I can do more about, so I will spend a little more time on, and that's this lack of civility, this lack of respect, this increased social media hostility, public comment hostility that we're seeing, which is really unfortunate, and it really has a profound impact on what we're doing, and a profound impact not only on us as humans, but on our program. And I'll give you an example. I shared with my board chair just about 3 months ago, maybe. We were going to host the names assembly. Anyone done that at the high school or middle school level? It's a great assembly. Have done it in every district I've been in. About every 4 years is the cycle. It's a fantastic assembly program, student voice centered around diversity and inclusion and acceptance and all kinds of isms, right? And I've never had a hard time. Part of the assembly is a student panel, and then it's followed with breakout sessions. So small groups of kids that are led by a student and teacher pair who are well trained to do this. Never have I had a hard time staffing the names assembly because our teachers are all in, always. It's a fantastic experience. They enjoy it. It's so impactful. This is the first time in my career, and this is year 30, that I've ever had a hard time staffing the names assembly, and the reason was because my teachers were afraid. What if they said something in a small group session? What if they stood up for a subgroup in a small group session? What was going to be the wrath that followed on social media? I was like, are you kidding me? And so I shared that with my board chair, and I said, you need to understand the impact on my teachers that this climate has. So what to do about that? I think a couple of things. I think we're navigating a time when there's a lot of poison in the pond, right? Unfortunately, but we've got this. We have to elevate education and educators every chance we get. So it begins with celebrating at our local level, celebrating their kids, celebrating the community's children, getting the pictures out there, getting the stories out there. Every time you can tell a good news story about one of their children, they're going to listen to you and they're going to believe you, right? Because it's their children or it's the neighbor's children. It's someone they know who's doing a good thing and learning something wonderful, and that's great. We need to flood the airways with positive press. So I swore I would never join Twitter. Karen Pachter, where are you? I'm tweeting up a storm. We've got the Cougar Den Instagram. I'm sending out newsletters. I'm sending out e-blasts. I'm on the morning news, for the love of God. I'm doing everything I can do to get positive press out there and flood the pond with positivity so that when there comes a little poison pill here and there, it's diluted and it's not as, attention is not as paid to it. And the other thing I think we need to do is be really explicit and really transparent in our defense of our teachers. And so I have shifted my rules a bit, much to some folks' stress. I tell folks to be brave. Some of you have heard me say that before. And so when folks say things about my teachers or say things about the program that just are patently untrue, where a decade ago I might have responded a little more politely, I'm less polite and less quiet now. I'm professional, but I go right at it. And I would encourage us all to go right at it. When things are said about your teachers or your program that aren't true, you can be professional. You can be explicit in what the truth is and keep telling the truth and keep speaking the truth as many times as you can to as many folks as you can. Or at the very least, you can very calmly but firmly say to the person who's making a lot of noise and saying things that aren't true, no, that's not true. That's not the case, thank you. And move on. Last thing I'll say, while all of this is going on, I think we do need to take time to remind our teachers why we're in this and remind our teachers that we're in it together. I started something just a couple of months ago in my faculty meetings where I handed out an index card to every faculty member a few months ago, and I asked them to think about the time that they interviewed for the job at HK and either why they wanted it or what they thought when they first got it, or if they were a veteran, why are you choosing to stay? Why are you still here? And I collected them all. I had an amazing time reading through all of them. And so every faculty meeting, I start the meeting with putting on the slide somebody's why, and then their name. Somebody else's why, and then their name. And what we're doing is building a community of resilience. And, oh yeah, that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm going to stay here. And so we're sharing each other's whys. And it's been a very powerful, small thing, but it's very powerful. So we have to remember things like that.
And it takes you right back to our keynote today with Brandy Luss, where she was finishing with that, having those difficult conversations about trust. And Donna's spot on with that. Donna, another place that you've been a champion is talking about women in leadership. And you've used your platform as a place to address equity and specifically women in leadership. What would you like to share to us about empowering women in positions of administration and leadership?
Well, that's obviously a lot bigger topic than 5 or 10 minutes is ever going to cover, but I'll give it my best shot. So here's the understatement of forever. Being a woman in a position of leadership is an entirely different thing than being a man in a position of leadership. It just is. All of you women out there know exactly what I'm talking about. And it starts from the very beginning in my experience, which some of it is just so ridiculous that people would think I was making it up, and I'm not going to share it here, but just tidbits. It starts from even the training program. So I went through UConn's training program. It's a fabulous training program. I recommend it highly. But an interesting thing happened. My second semester, second year, so I'm about to graduate and get a job. We had to do internships, of course, all throughout, and I interned with Mike Buckley. Anybody remember Mike Buckley? Wonderful. Oh my God, love that man. Still an ally. So I interned with him, and I had done this, if I do say so myself, darn good internship project. We opened an alternative school, reduced the dropout rate down to 0, increased the graduation rate to 100%. Like, it was golden. Okay, fine. In comes my site supervisor, who is an older gentleman, telling him about it, my grades all about this internship project, and he said to me at the end of the conversation, so you plan to have a family? And I was like, I was recently married, and I said, well, actually, yes, I do. And he said, you should consider another profession. Dead serious, dead serious. And Mike heard him, and we just kind of bristled together, and I might have said a thing or two in response, might have. And I don't know, can't remember. And he gave me a B on my internship project. I was like, come on. So anyway, Mike, coached me through that. Never mind, Donna, you do you, blah, blah, blah. I tell that story in the beginning just because of the way this is going to end. But I think empowering women in education and women in leadership positions specifically is around 2 things. Awareness, and then the response to what you're now aware of. So I will tell you, awareness. Women are differently received. We're heard differently. Whereas I can go right at something and be called aggressive. My male counterpart goes right at something and is called assertive. He's called strong. I'm called something else. It's all right. There's actually scientific evidence behind the fact that women's voices are heard differently than men's voices. Statistically, we're interrupted many more times than men. And then as we age, interestingly enough, our ears actually can't hear women's voices as much as men's voices. So there's a reason why women's voices at the table are often not acknowledged or heard as much. So ladies and gentlemen, be aware of that. If you're aware of something, maybe you can counter it. I read an article recently that men typically will go for a leadership position when they feel they've met 40% of the qualifications on the requirements list. Women wait to feel 90% before we feel confident to apply. I see women nodding. So, and another thing to just be aware of is we all have common experiences. And I think I'm a pretty tough cookie. I've been called things that mean tough cookie.
It's part of that trust in speaking the truth.
Despite that, I have had moments where I have thought to myself, with respect to being a female, this isn't supposed to be happening to me. I'm a strong woman. And pretty significant things. And yet, if they happen to me, they could happen to any female. So just an awareness of common experiences. I see a lot of heads nodding. I know we share a lot of common experiences. So I point out the awareness piece because once we're aware, and I do mean our male counterparts and our female counterparts, men, you are allies in this, then we can respond. So a word to the men. My strongest mentors and allies are still men. My experience has just put me with some phenomenal male leaders who I love and adore, and they are with me every step of the way. So this in no way is an anti-man piece. It isn't. It's an invitation for both men and women to be aware of what is different about the female's experience. And then when you have an opportunity, counter it. Include a woman at the table when there isn't a woman at the table, whatever that table is. Listen for her to be interrupted, and if she's interrupted, maybe hold up. I'd like to hear what Melissa has to say. She didn't get to finish. Encourage the women, the young girls in your life to aspire to leadership positions, because until we have more women in positions of leadership, more women won't want to enter leadership positions. We aspire to what we see. Which brings me back to the beginning of my story and the comment of my site supervisor of whether or not I wanted to have a family. My daughter, Katie, is now 21. And of course, the love of my life, and I'm very aware that what I do, she sees. I'm very aware that I pave the path for her. She's a year away from graduating college. She's a year away from entering the workforce as a woman. Any difference that I can make and my sisters can make now makes it easier for Katie. So last part of this, we were in DC together. I chose to take Katie to the DC Gala where I was actually named National Principal of the Year. Not that I knew I was going to be named. My money was on a man because my predecessor was a woman and I knew they wouldn't pick two women in a row. But anyway, but they did. So Katie was there, and before we went down to the dinner where we were going to find out, who would be named the national principal, she said, "Mom, I got to tell you something. I'm going to try to get through this. And I'm telling you now, so in case you lose, you don't think it's my consolation speech." Thanks, Katie. And she basically said, "Mom, you've worked so hard your whole life, and you are everything I could ever want in a mom, and you were the strongest role model that I could possibly have, and thank you for that." And so that matters. So to my site supervisor in UCAP, who's now dead, or I'd tell him, I'm a really good principal, but I'm a fantastic mother. So yes, you can do both.
Round of applause, definitely. What will Katie be graduating in? What's her major?
Well, she's majoring in global studies, Glenn.
Right.
Yep, she is.
So what will she be doing when she gets out, Donna?
Well, Glenn, we're fixing up my basement.
Think of all the time you're going to still get to role model for her. That is fantastic. That is fantastic. Donna, so women in leadership, just one piece of equity and inclusion that has really been at the forefront within the country the last few years. In your role as the National Principal of the Year, what have you seen in equity and inclusion when you think of seeing that at its best? What have you seen that, as administrators, we can take back and maybe use to create the type of culture and environment within our buildings that we want to see?
Okay, so from my perspective, equity is about access and support, whether it's equity in the academic arena, whether it's equity on the sports field, equity in the workforce, whatever it is, it's about access and support. So access is easy, right? Just open it up. Open up everything. Everything's open to everyone. Come on, come one, come all. It's the support piece that can sometimes get tricky. So I don't have all the answers to equity. That's a much larger issue than I could possibly be an expert on, but I can tell you what has worked for me in a couple of different areas. One is socioeconomic equity. So despite the fact that I've worked largely in DERG C and D schools, there are always the ones that can afford the opportunities and the ones that can't. And so I've been very conscious to always have and keep a good amount of resource in an account that I just even the playing field with. So I buy sports equipment for the student who can't afford it. I pay for the AP test for the kid who can't afford it, the cap and gown, the field trip. One time I even paid for ice time for a hockey player who couldn't afford it. Those fees are huge, by the way. You all know that. So as much as you can as an administrator, we all have SAF accounts and student activity accounts, principal funds, that kind of thing. Find a way to keep those accounts well supplied and use it to even the playing field. Another way that something that I think that I have contributed positively towards kind of leveling the playing field is our special education model, which I've spoken about and shared with folks in the past. It's actually the same model Joe's familiar with. We used in Suffield, and I brought it to HK when I came to HK, where we moved away from a traditional resource model and went to what we call a targeted intervention approach, where we identify the student's primary gap area, math, reading, writing, executive functioning, or social emotional needs. And we teach credit-bearing classes specifically aimed at the knowledge and skills they do not have in a very targeted way, instead of bring in your history homework and I'll try to teach you how to write while you're doing your history homework and your history paper. No, I actually teach you new learning in a credit-bearing class aimed at what you need most. And what we found is after a year, we closed the math gap by about 10% in our school, and between the identified population and the non-identified population. The reading and writing gap by about 17% over 2 years, and we doubled our exit rate to about 15%, which is where it stays now. So in terms of equity and leveling the playing field, you do have to think about your neediest learners, and that's one of the pieces. Last, you mentioned culture, I think. That's a different kind of equity. So when it comes to developing equity in your building through student culture, my experience has been let the kids lead it with their voice, because I've found them to be more naturally open on a lot of different topics than maybe we are as adults. They're growing up in this new and more open time than we did. And so if student voice leads it and we get out of the way, oftentimes we yield great results. I'll give you a couple of examples from HK just in the last couple of years. We have various different clubs, of course, in the high school, and my LGBTQ population actually came to a leadership team meeting. By that I mean all my department heads and me. And they're the ones who taught us how to properly use pronouns and the whole changing landscape of pronouns. And it was so helpful to learn from them, including what to do when you mess up, that it was very much well received coming from the students. My students, we did have the names assembly, pulled it off. And so in terms of equity, different types of diversity and all different kinds of inclusion, again, let the student voices lead. So my student A team, my captain's council, my equity team, all of those kids are in charge of all of the follow-up activities for the names assembly. Instead of assigning it to the adult facilitators of those small groups, I've assigned it to the kids. So kids listen to kids. So that just makes a difference.
Absolutely, and two great resources that we have at CAS is Henry Rondon and Sharice Miller. They started several years ago the Student Equity Advisory Board, and out of that they've run the Men in Color, Women of Color, leadership series, and they bring out recently Bunnell High School. Bunnell High School's Minute Color leadership was recognized by the NAACP. Congratulations, Coach, on that. And just tremendous work. So if you're looking for a resource, Henry and Cherise bring out kids from the student equity group and from those groups to come to other schools to talk about the students and how they can develop this within their school. It's a great resource for you. Donna, one last question, and before we take some Q&A from the audience, if we have any. Everybody at today's leadership conference has a common purpose: to provide the best experience we can for the kids in our schools and our communities. Tell us what you have learned about effectively incorporating student voice into the decision-making and empowering students.
Thanks. I've enjoyed this piece very much, actually, over my career, developing student voice. So a couple things. Number one, I think that as much as you can include student voice in the day-to-day operations of your schools, you set the stage for including student voice all over the place. So I've mentioned my A team, that's a student advisory team. Most principals have one, who meet with them maybe once a month, once every couple of weeks on all kinds of issues of student life. They set the agenda, they tell me what they want to talk about. I am allowed to bring up things if I have a concern, but usually it's mostly their agenda. They've been phenomenal. They do things like propose new policy for the Board of Ed, dress code, substance abuse policy for athletes, that kind of thing. I have a captain's council. We have 75% of our students who are athletes in HK, which just makes a captain's council an incredibly effective lever when I need it to affect change in the high school. And again, it's a communication opportunity between adults in the building and the captains that they then take back to the students, and they also can influence what we do in the leadership. So day-to-day, student voice, equity team, things like that I've already mentioned. Student Board of Ed reps who get to go to the board meetings each meeting. We all have these, right? And tell all the good things that are happening at the high school. When you have a culture of student voice being regularly included in the governance of the school, if you will, or at least in the informal leadership of the school, it puts you in a good position to incorporate that voice when more serious things happen, which is something I would just like to share briefly. So over the last 5 years at HK, we've had, like all schools do, a variety of different issues pop up, some of them very serious. And when that has happened, what I have found most effective is incorporating student voice in the solution. I'll give you a couple of examples. In 2018, the Parkland shooting happened. Remember? Parkland school shooting? And that was the one that affected my kids more than others, I think because there was cell phone footage from inside the school. It was horrible, of course, but it allowed students and the public to see and hear things that they hadn't been able to see and hear before, thankfully. And it really rattled my school, and it really rattled my community in a way that other school tragedies hadn't, for better or worse. And so my kids were nervous, and parents were going to the Board of Ed and asking, is our school safe? Are we safe here? And kids were it was affecting their learning, and so something had to be done right away. And so what we did was called upon a few student leaders who were influential in their various friend groups, and we all know who those kids are, and all the resource personnel of the building. So the security staff, the local troopers, the nurse, the counselors, of course the administration, and we prepared in advance. And we had what we call town meetings, which at the time we would call half a class down at a time. So it was a group in my school, that means about 80 kids, 70 to 80 kids. Small enough to be personal, but that meant, of course, you had to do it several times. And we allowed open conversation and encouraged open conversation and questioning around what's your experience now? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about what has happened in our country recently? What are you most afraid of? And then we could share with them all the different things, because there are so many things that we do in our school, in every school, to keep kids safe that they're just not even aware of. They'd walk by the lockdown buttons that we have and not notice them and not really know what happens if someone pushes one of those. Like, is help coming? How soon is help here? Things that they just needed to know about the infrastructure of their school, their physical plant, and also all of the safety measures and proactive measures we take behind the scenes that they wouldn't have reason to know because they haven't necessarily accessed those things in the past, and just had an open conversation. They were allowed to ask every question. They were allowed to ask scenario questions, and I answered honestly. They were high schoolers. I felt like we could have that level of conversation, and it shifted the energy in the building, those meetings. We did them all throughout one day, so we were done in one day. And you could kind of feel the collective, okay, we've got this. And then school could go back to kind of normal, and teaching and learning could resume. Another example, more recently, a couple of years ago, as we were coming out of COVID, but not fast enough, my geographic region happened to suffer a sudden spike in student suicides. It was an awful time. And there were, we had a couple of very, very serious attempts from students in my school. And, you know, it's a small state. Our communities are closely knit together. And my kids were really feeling it. And so we had already done all the things behind the scenes. And strangely, suicide's a different topic. And so I forgot to include student voice. And that was a mistake I made originally. So the counseling staff was doing extra support. We had extra measures in place. We were targeting students that we knew were more at risk. We were reaching out to families. We were doing all the things that we should do. But we hadn't told the kids. And so 3 senior boys actually popped in during lunch one day and said, "Miss Hayward, can we talk to you?" Of course you can. "Have you heard about the suicides that have happened around the region?" "I have. They make me very sad. Did you know these individuals?" And we had a conversation, and yes, they did, and they were profoundly impacted. And they said, "We're worried, like, we should do something here so it doesn't happen here." And so I said, "Well, I'm glad you're asking." And I told them all of the things that we had in place, all the extra counseling, all the extra resources, all the extra attention that was already being paid behind the scenes. And they looked at me and they said, "That's so great, but why haven't you told the kids?" I was like, ugh. Like, I know to include student voice, I know this, I just didn't on this topic because it was this topic, and that was a mistake. "You're right. Let's tell the kids." And so I asked those 3 boys if they would facilitate a series of town meetings, which now we've done on a few different topics, so they know how it's done, they know what it looks like, they've seen it happen before. So I, of course, partnered them with the counseling team, myself, and we prepared in advance, of course, and had town meetings where these 3 boys led the conversation on mental health and the topic of student safety in our region. And they shared the resources that the school had. And we developed more resources in these town meetings where kids were saying, "Can we have a this? Can we do a that?" "Of course we can. Of course we can. This is your school." And it was very, very effective. I don't think we could have had those conversations when topics of urgency came up if we didn't have the groundwork of student voice being part of the day-to-day. So that would be my advice.
It's powerful stuff, Donna. Thank you. So we have time for about 30, 40 questions. And so does anybody have a question for Donna?
It's the Friday afternoon at 3.
Does anybody have a spa appointment you're waiting to get to? All right, there we go. Well, again, we would very much like to thank Donna. We're incredibly honored and privileged here. Donna also served as the CAS president of the board of directors. And again, your service, Donna, to CAS, we can't thank you enough for that over the years. And we are just grateful and extremely honored to have you as not only our High School Principal of the Year, but the NASSP National Principal of the Year. Donna Hayward.